Welcome. In this special edition of On Point, we will talk about the Manipur turmoil with Dr. Arambam Noni. Dr. Noni is an associate professor at the Department of Political Science in DM University, Imphal. He is an author and the executive editor of the Alternative Perspectives, a quarterly academic journal. Welcome, Dr. Noni, on our show.
Thank you, Karthikeya, for having me on your show.
It's a pleasure, and let me begin this interview by asking you, Dr. Noni, where do we locate Manipur issue? Contested history, contested demography, or economic issues related to land?
Okay, can I come in now?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. As far as the history, the collective history, and the constitutionality of the state of Manipur is concerned, there is no contestation. But I think when you are saying and talking about contested history, you seem to be referring to 1917 and 1919 incident, which some communities have been trying to see the event of the history and the past from the lens of today. And you can see a lot of political mobilizations have been done to memorialize this incident. But if you look at the facticity of the incidents like 1917 to 1919, you can also have a very clear vision to sort of debunk this entire event from the perspective of the people. And if you, just to be on the facts, if you look at the number of people died, the civilians died in the period. The number of Nagas died in the event is much more than the number of Kukis who died in the event. So therefore, it will be very difficult and to actually go with the ethnicizing narrative of claiming war between a community and an empire. But as you know, wars are basically fought between two established entities. If you talk about 1891 Anglo-Manipuri War, there was a proclamation of the Queen, and there was a kind of a full, fight between the two entities called State of Manipur and the British. So that's why, if you look at the writers like Professor Laldena or T.S. Gante, who are basically the cookies or intellectuals, and if you look at the works of Professor like Gangumai Kami, they've noted down the significant number of casualties suffered by the Nagas, particularly in the hands of the cookies. So the 1917 and 1919 incident cannot be truly qualified to be called as a war between the British and a section of people. Moreover, just to add one more point, I want to tell you that an RTI was filed to MHA, the government of India, and it was replied that there was no such Anglo-Kuki war officially, and that RTI from the MHA also has some reasonable explanation to the incident that we've been talking about.
Okay.
And so I think that part, the
Dr.
contestation part is very clear, I think.
Okay, I'll add one more thing. You can address that because I'm happy to have you here, because at least we are not having discussion on one event, another incident. We are having on a larger issue of Manipur. For example, a lot of panelists would come, for example, the word Lamka, Chura Chandpur. When I say contested, the same place acquires two names. That is why I'm saying contested. Why has it become so in Manipur? What is the social origin of one place having two names, one territory having two different cultural imagination? Why has that happened?
I think I come back to you on these. The whole nomenclature of Turanjapur is an official nomenclature, which is in the official parlance and official documents.
Correct, absolutely.
That's number one. I come to another very interesting point. I have seen a lot of discussions happening in this channel, particularly from I call it a section of elites and section of armed groups who are trying to, I call it weaponization of ethnicity. This whole idea of, reclaiming, spaces in the name of ethnic identity is not good for a democratic political culture. like Manipur or like, for that matter, India. If you talk about ethnicizing politics, there are 250 ethnic communities in the Northeast India, and we cannot imagine 250 states coming up. Manipur alone has around 35 ethnic communities. So multicultural space like Manipur has to be respected, and the value of Manipur, which if we talk about land and people, it's not a Meitei space. This value, which is about 8% of the state's land, which is also when reduced to when after excluding your paddy fields and rivers and wetlands, you have around 4% of the state's land. So in which 60% of the population is being held up, which is a very, very interesting cosmopolitan space, and we actually celebrate this cosmopolitan character of the Valley of Manipur. Coming back to your point,
Dr. Noni, one interjection. So what is your idea of Manipur? How do you describe Manipur?
I'll come to that. Before coming to that, I want to remind you, because it will clarify a lot of doubts for the audience. Because in 1923, there was a state standing order of the State Darbar of Manipur, which read as below. It said that land belonged to the Raja, and the hunting rights and the rights of the hill people to venture into the hill areas will be confined to a radius of 1/4 of a mile. That's a very interesting point, because it goes back to a very long history of how land governance, how the hill governance, how state making process is beginning to take a very interesting shape in terms of modern legislative norms. And if you come to a 1994 and 5 Supreme Court judgment in which it said the land belonged to the state, and if you talk about the abrogation or taking away of right to property from the Indian Constitution's Part 3 to some other legal section, it also reflects that the right to property basically moved away from fundamental rights section because of this historicity, how land and the state is being negotiated. So that part is very clear. Coming back to your point, you're asking about the idea of Manipur. I would like to request you to remember what the 1948 18 October proclamation of the then Maharaja meant. It said the idea of Manipur is constituted of the hill and the valley, and the size of Manipur's territory is 8,620 square miles plus 7,000 square miles of the Kabo Valley, which includes the hill and the valley of Manipur state. So you can see a sense of collectivity growing up, a sense of modern state system growing up, where the hill and the valley came together to write a separate constitution, which was duly acknowledged by the current Honorable Home Minister of India, Mr. Amit Shah. So these are some very, very interesting history of Manipur, where idea of Manipur is being
Let us move, Dr. Noni. Time is a very limiting factor, and we have a lot of issues to discuss. So, let's stick to that. Is lack of democratic self-governance a cause of discontent in hill areas like funding? Your comments, sir.
A couple of things. At least I would like your attention to be paid to two issues. One, when we say democratization of self-governance, that is very important. The whole philosophy of Panchayati Raj is basically rooted in the democratization of self-governance at the grassroots level. But in Manipur, you have ADC system. But there is a fundamental problem which we all have to understand. I've been arguing that this ethnic idea of ethnicity-based homeland is untenable, and it's obsolete if you look at the multicultural aspect of the society that we have today. That's number one. Number two, if you talk about self-governance and democratization, we have to also look at the history of the inability of the state to actually modernize customary institutions like chieftainship, like inability to reform lands or inability to survey state lands, for instance. So this has created a bottleneck in the modernization and democratization of self-governance in the hill areas of Manipur, particularly. And moreover, one more point. In comparison to the Naga landholding pattern, the Kuki landholding pattern seems to be like hovering around a jamindari kind of a system where in the name of community land ownership, the people, the civilians are being alienated from modern system of governance, and their access to development and access to credit system or banking system is also being deprived. One last point, I want to tell you that in 1967, the Manipur Hill Areas Acquisition of Chiefs' Rights Act was promulgated, and it was subsequently assented by the then President of India, but till date, this law has not been notified, and I think if you talk about democratization of self-governance in the state of Manipur, including particularly in the hills, I think you need to look into these kind of law, because Mizoram, though it has 371G, it has a special provision under 371G. It has implemented these Abolition of Chief Rights Act. That's very important
Dr. Noni,
point. If you talk about
Dr. Noni, do you think that, okay, wait a minute. Do you think more needs to be done in terms of governance in the hill areas? More can be done?
Of course, there can be no denying that fact. Of course.
Of course. That's wonderful, to have some sort of a convergence. And do you think that the more money can be diverted to the hill areas for developmental funds?
That's a very interesting question. I think there are a couple of points that has to be demystified. I'll tell you the facts from the government office data. Out of 100, let me begin by this way. 76.44% of Manipur's annual state budget goes to non-plan expenditure, which includes police, salaries, transportation, etc. So 76.44% is for non-plan expenditure, and 23% is for planned funds, which means that the extensive section or majority of Manipur's annual budget goes to non-planned sector, which means you are left with a very limited, around 10% of fund of the state coffer, which is around, say, let me come back to this point. So it is 22%, which is slightly less than, of course, more than 10%. It has a very limited capacity to rebuild the state in the way that you're talking about. And moreover, if you look at the direct and indirect revenue that has been collected from the state, which stands at around 4,000 crore out of the 37 crore annual budget of the state, which is 10% of the state revenue. My only point is that these direct and indirect tax sources is basically coming from the valley, and therefore you need to modernize institutions in the hills where you can also have access to revenue collection process. So if you talk about hill and valley funding, you cannot simply reduce funding for the hills with reference to tribal affairs department, because there are other departments which is actually using a lot of money for the hills. And therefore, if you talk about, say, highway construction, the Moreh highway construction, the trilateral highway, or the railway, connection, it is not for the valley. It is for the entire state. So this whole idea that the hills are not getting any
Dr. Noni,
Dr.
Noni, now I want your comment on something which people take extreme position. I have my position. People know that as a journalist. I don't believe in the fact that there should be a creation of subspaces within a state. This can just go on and go on and go on. I think the answer lies in the bettering of the governance process. The problem at the heart of this issue is one, but very deep, is ethnic self-governance. Now, some people use the word of separate administration. My question to you, you're an academic. What can be done which in issues like this, so that it can be resolved to the satisfaction of principal parties? Because when you say separate administration, it's a deeply polarizing issue. Officially, I even don't know the stand of the center, but maybe as a journalist, if I read it, the silence, I'm pretty sure that they have a very different view on it. So my question is whether it's not whether it's correct or incorrect. My question is, can this issue be can it be resolved to the mutual satisfaction of both communities? Can there be some sort of an internal mechanism?
I think, of course, there can be. A couple of things needs to be, underscore when we talk about. I want to flag off a couple of points, which is going to be very good for all of us to have a kind of a relook. Let's go back to the history of Manipur, not in a very nuanced or very detailed sense, but I want to begin by saying that if you look at the history of Manipur, it has a very collective coexisting process in which every community participates. That's number one. Number two, if you even look at the history of the States Reorganization Commission report, 1956, it said. Let me quote a section of that judgment, that recommendation, which said that reorganization of states on the test of culture and language is not desirable nor feasible, because that the idea of reorganizing states in South India was basically a one-time measure. It was not to be basically a long-term, future-oriented program. So therefore, Manipur-like state cannot be bifurcated into these ethnic forms, because, as I said, that the valley, which is a cosmopolitan space, has become a geographic minority because of the certain legal apartheid. But I'm sure, and I've been seeing it as a student of political science, that there is no significant demand, there's no significant movement from the valley saying that we want to stay in the hills. There is no such movement. The only thing that I want to apprise the audience is that there is a genuine anxiety of the valley people, which is not only Meitei, which is inclusive of many tribal communities. So these kind of bottleneck in terms of legal provisions has also now beginning to create ripples, and anxieties of land security. So if you talk about ethnic self-governance, this is untenable, this is obsolete, and this is not in sync with the democratic values. This is not in sync with multicultural values. So I request people who are trying to glamorize this whole idea of ethnic-based homeland or law is not going to really help to establish better understanding between coexisting communities. Of course, we can talk about governance, we can talk about development, we can talk about more infrastructure, we can talk about
Dr. Noni, I've got 4 more important questions.
Yeah.
Is it correct, since I'm in context of the popular narrative, I'm not stating it as a fact. When people say, when it comes to valley, it means Meiteis, when it comes to the hills, it is Cookies. Is it a correct narrative?
I think, Kartike, I think you have rightly pointed out, and I wanted to have some say on this because being a media person based in Delhi, you need to also refer to the recent PIB handout, which was given on the meeting of the MLAs from Manipur. And I think it was unconstitutional, or it was at least against the spirit of the constitution of the country. And to refer to the MLAs from the ethnic identity basis was completely not in sync with the spirit of the constitution, because you are not supposed to identify an MLA with a particular community. So to say that the Cookies, Zo, Mar MLAs, to say that Meitei MLAs, to say that the Naga MLAs, Naga themselves are very heterogeneous identity. The Cookies are itself very, very heterogeneous, and for that matter, the Meitei MLAs basically do not only represent Meiteis, they also represent mainland Indians who are here residents, who are the Nepalese are there, the Nagas, the Tangals. Many people are voting for them. So I think, to come back to the question, the whole idea of segregating people on ethnic line, even to the level of identifying MLA, was very unwarranted, number one.
No.
Number two,
my question was not that. My question was not that. That is, that's what you have said, Shivamoto. My question was, this narrative that one space is occupied by only one community and the other space is occupied by other community. Is it a correct narrative? That's what I was asking.
Of course.
My question was limited to that. My question was not what you answered. 2 more things, sir. 2 more things, 2 more things. Time is of essence. 2 more things. And I really need your answer on that. Now, one, why do you think that there is no social impetus for peace talk? Why? Why isn't it coming from the society?
I think, keeping in mind of the time constant, let me come back to a couple of points very, very quickly, because I want to do justice to the time that you have slotted me. So, first of all, these the Métis or the tribes for that matter, there are pockets of Métis who are settled in the hill areas, particularly in the More, in Kotha, or in Churachandpur. I have a point to raise that, yes, of course, from the valley also Cookies or people have been evacuated or they had to flee the valley because of the violence. At the same time, the Métis from Churachandpur and other areas had to flee those areas. But the only point that you have to note is the nature in which people have been, forced to flee, and the nature in which their properties have been dismantled to rebels is actually a matter of concern. Therefore, I normally use in my writing, it's called some sort of a demographic sanitization, if not ethnic cleansing. So that has to be noted out. Number two, this whole idea of segregating people, particularly the Métis and the tribe, came up basically after 1960 MLR and LR Act.
Okay.
But these law actually restricted and cleaved the wings of the Métis to settle, or the non-tribes to settle in the hill areas. That's number one. The other point is that, this whole idea of ethnic homeland is basically, as I said, that is basically very unfortunate. But at the same time, unless you address the question of, of a designed, design sanitization of a particular section. If it is done by the valley people, it has to be objected. If
No, that was not, again, Dr. Noni, that was not my question.
Yeah.
My question, you're going back to something very different.
Yeah.
My question was, why isn't there social impetus for a talk? Why is it incumbent on... आप बार-बार अलग चीज पे जा रहे हैं. मेरा सवाल वो आई नहीं, आप जवाब कुछ और दे रहे हैं, मैं सवाल कुछ और पूछ रहा हूं. My question was, why isn't there impetus from civil society to have a conversation?
I think the civil societies will have to cooperate with any process of dialogue and reconciliation. That's number one. But I'll just quote a recommendation or a report from Geeta Mittal Committee. In 2023 October, it said that when compensation was to be given to the communities or people who are victims of the violence, I quote the Commission's report. It said, KIM, I suppose Kuki NP Manipur, and ITLF had restrained the civilians from claiming compensation, and even, I think, many other benefits the state was trying to extend. The point I'm trying to raise is that even in Ziribam, Paite, Wi-Fi, Mars, the Manipur state officials and CRPF, Assam Rifle, all came together for a negotiation process. It was, again, like sort of discouraged, and it was actually prevented from coming up. So the CSOs, even if it is a valley or the hills, I think they have to be
you see, Mr. Noni, let's not get forces into it, right now. My question was neither on Assam Rifle nor on the Indian Army. They are the forces which represent the integrity of this country. I don't want them part of my conversation. My question was specifically in context of the civil society impetus. All these organizations are doing a fabulous job, the men in olives there. My last question to you. Is there a issue of framing in Manipur? Do you think it's a national security issue? Do you think it's an issue of demography? Or do you think, how do you describe the core issue of Manipur violence? My last question to you. Please answer my question.
Okay, to the point.
To the point.
I think you have been talking about FMR, right?
Yes.
And FMR, I call it as a part of an enumeration process of the state. And modern states cannot operate without enumerating its own citizens. And how come that the government, come to a point that the fencing will not happen for a particular area? This is actually this requires a lot of critical assessment, because enumeration of state citizen or any process of, or you call it census or Aadhaar collection, all these are necessary elements and processes of the state. So that's number one. Mm-hmm. So if you do not do it, or if you encourage people who are not actually coming in consensus with these processes of enumeration.
So are you saying illegal immigration is the key issue?
Of course, that's because it's not me who
is it the key issue? I'm asking you.
I'm telling you that the Home Minister on the floor of Parliament had acknowledged it. The Minister of External Affairs had acknowledged it. So I need not say it because it's officially acknowledged by the government of India that the serious problem of infiltration is there.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Noni, for joining me. And this is to my viewers that this is an attempt to hold a sort of a meaningful conversation with the people who understand Manipur. And I'll be holding this conversation with multiple people, not restricting myself to the politicians, to the academicians, to the civil society workers, to retired bureaucrats, to have a longer and a deeper conversation, a democratic one, a frank one, where they'll be allowed to say what they think has gone wrong and what they think should go right now for the Manipur. And this will be part of a larger series of interviews which I'll be doing in context of the current situation of Manipur. Thank you.
Hey, why are so many